is the Investor Connect podcast program. This is Hall T. Martin. I'm the host of the show, in which we interview angel investors, venture capital, private equity, family offices, and many other investor groups for startups and growth companies. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you for joining us. Well, hello, this is Hall Martin with Investor Connect. Today we're here with Louise Yochi Klein and Merom Klein of Courage Growth Partners, a sponsor and strategic advisor to a number of angel groups and early stage VCs. Louise and Merom, thank you for joining us.
Hey, thanks, Hall. Appreciate being here with you.
Great to be here with you.
Well, we were all at the Angel Capital Association Summit about a month ago in Columbus, Ohio, and wanted to go through and get your impressions of that event. And it's changed over the years, and not everybody can make it, but for those who couldn't, I thought we might hit the highlights and talk about what we found there. And so let's go ahead and kick off and talk about some of them. Some of the key elements that I found interesting, for example, was the AECA has actually commissioned a group to create a model convertible note. I didn't realize it, but the NVCA, of course, has a set of model documents for equity term sheets, safe notes, and the like, but they don't have anything for convertible notes. And I found that was quite interesting because convertible notes, I guess many investors don't know this, but most startups are just downloading those off the website. And without any oversight from an attorney, they're drafting up the terms and they're putting that out to investors. And many angel investors just want to be in the deal. They're not really looking at it, but the standard convertible note out there is missing a lot of key components. And I thought that was really helpful to have things like information rights, IP assignment agreements, and my best one I thought was the most favored nation clause in there, which gives the holder the rights of getting the best deal of any investors in the round. So I thought that was a really cool thing. So I thought they did a really good job with it and thought this is a great move forward for the industry. What did you guys think?
Well, our focus, Hall, is more on leadership and human capital as business psychologists than on the financial engineering. And I think the thing that's attractive about convertible notes is that before you commit to an equity round, you have an opportunity to kind of test drive a little bit and see how the company is going to perform, see what they're going to need, see what the collaboration looks like. And adding in those rights that give investors some real say-so and some real ability to have some clout and some rights in that it's important if you're coming in as an influencer, as a partner in contributing to the success of an early stage company.
I think that's a good point. There's a new world coming up with angel investors, and convertible notes are still a part of that, but it's great to see people coming out with tools that can help us with this as well. The second thing I noticed there was the rise of the university-based angel network, and I sat at the table with the group from the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, and they were talking about starting an angel network at their university. And I started one at Baylor University back in 2007, and one of the things I learned is that there are big differences between a standard angel network and a university one. The first is that the reason people do that is for the student engagement and job placement is number one, and number two, making money for the investor is a distant second. And I remember when I started the Central Texas Angel Network here in Austin, I actually went to the University of Texas and I went into the Alumni Association by myself. That was a mistake, and said, I think we can help you guys make money. And they looked at me and said, we have all the money in the world. We don't need your money. And what I didn't realize was that they're not judged by money at the university. They're judged by the student outcomes. And so that's where the Angel Group really has to align with the university mission. And I was happy to see this because when we started the Baylor one, there was about 4 of them around the country at that time. The Notre Dame group, the Irish Angels were the biggest ones that we saw, but there were a couple of others. And we interviewed them on how to do it and so forth, and came out with a good model that we figured out at Baylor. We needed a business school professor to be our sponsor. Last thing a university wants is a bunch of alumni running around the campus, not knowing how the system works. And then there's also having faculty that would actually work with the students to make that and build that into the curriculum and the program that they have at the university was really the key element. But it was a great opportunity for the students because they got real world experience with Real deals, real investors, real money, and they get the best jobs, of course, of anybody coming out of there. And I was glad to see that that model is becoming more of a standard at many universities for sure. What did you think about that, Louise?
So I've done a lot of work with tech transfer in several different countries. And I think there's some real advantages to partnering early with an angel investor network that's within a university, because it's not only does it just help them understand more about the actual ecosystem and what it's going to take, but it also gets to a very key point that Merom and I talk a lot about, which is the difference between launching and adopting. And that's where angel investors can come in, work with the students to understand, here, we can help shape your company, we can help grow this, we can help show you how to get something adopted. Because without that, it's just a cool idea. And I also think that you mentioned the Alumni Association. I think it's another way that alumni can engage with the students back at their alma mater to really help them understand what's it going to take to get you launched in the world today. And to, you mentioned about, well, this is, they're more interested in this or the potential job creation. This is actually where it can really fit in, that the angels can help prepare them for real jobs that are out there, to understand the business side of things, not just the tech dev or the scientific side, but what it's going to take out there. It also addresses another point about entrepreneurship and the millennials and the Gen Zs by introducing them to this world and helping keep a really active innovation network.
That's a good point.
Going,
It's real world applications for technology, which is a great experience for the students. Merom, what were your thoughts?
Well, you and Yochi focused on the students, and I would also add that it's a great growth opportunity for the faculty as well, and a great opportunity for them to get exposure beyond an academic setting of how their discoveries can get used and what it's going to take for their discoveries to get adopted in the commercial world as well. And, many faculty, even tenured faculty, are really looking for a next growth step, a next learning, a next place where they can expand their vistas. And these kinds of angel groups are a great way for them to be able to do that.
Yeah, that's a good point. There was also an AI fireside chat there that I thought was quite interesting. What were some of the more exciting potential capabilities that you found there, Louise?
Well, this is one of the most provocative sessions I think we attended. And I think it's one that a thesis that a lot of IP specialists will want to hear. But I think it could also be kind of scary for other folks. They said it's almost impossible to achieve a lasting technology advantage given all what's possible with open source AI and proprietary AI platforms, and with how hard it is to protect IP that's been developed with new AI tools. So it gets back to, what's the value you're delivering? How much adoption can you generate? How solid are your collaborations with the champions who use and proselytize your AI innovations? Which means that your partnering skills and adoption accelerating skills are going to be just as important, if not more so, than your technology and engineering skills.
Merom, what are your thoughts?
Oh, I'm going to build on what Yochi just said. It's, if as investors we're focused on what creates value for an exit, it really is looking at the network multiplier effect. It's looking at the traction that you've generated. It's looking at the strength of your customer partnerships. And are you really embedded where you're almost irreplaceable for your customers? Or are you kind of a kicky piece of technology, interesting technology that can be swept up and replaced with the next new thing that comes along? And that's where adoption becomes really key. It's really looking at the partnership that you've created, looking at your ability to land and expand, your ability to retain, your ability to increase the profitability of your offering. And that's what acquirers are going to be looking for, more so than the next big invention that may or not be protectable by conventional IP protections.
That was what I took away. The IP implications are very interesting. You don't necessarily own your IP anymore because it's subsumed
Exactly.
inside a bigger network. And how do you control that?
Yeah.
How do you control your
Right.
future through it? So AI is more than an enabling
you do-
technology. It's now becoming a controlling one.
But you do own your customer.
So
And you
I guess
do
that's a good
own,
point.
that's where the strengths of those partnerships and the skills that Yoki referenced about building those partnerships, building those collaborations, driving adoption, landing and expanding adoption, being when the budget cut comes, that someone goes, well, we can cut a bunch of things, but man, we can't cut that, that technology provider. That's really key to our competitive advantage. And those are the things you can own above and beyond the IP.
So have you seen that with any of your customers and your companies?
Definitely. Absolutely. So, Merom, you work with that health insurance company in Israel. Why don't you tell a little bit about that? Because I think it's a really good illustration.
Yeah, we're working with an incredible AI solution that allows health insurance companies to target their messages to micro audiences. And think about it, if it's a micro audience that's an underserved patient population, really can be impacted by health education that drives them to wellness. This AI can improve what health insurers are doing to reach that audience and drive them to wellness. What they've understood is it really is the strength of their collaboration, the strength of their partnership, how they're looked at as trusted advisors by the health equity people, the quality people, the marketing people inside their key customers. They'll try it on one patient population and they'll go, wow, look at the impact. Let's expand this outward to other groups. And then they've got to deploy experts within a large, complex health insurance system to drive adoption with other audiences in the company. So they've invested in the technology. Yes, they've invested in the pilots. Yes, they've invested in the marketing, but they've also invested in customer success. They've invested in data operations. They've invested in a number of other functions that are really about driving adoption and making the user who goes out on a limb and says, hey, let's try this and see how it works, making them heroes and making them successful, and then showcasing that in the rest of the company. And that's a huge part of their product offering in addition to the technology. And it's given them a big advantage over other competitors that will come in because they understand the disease states, they understand the patients, they understand the influence systems, they understand the networks in those companies, and they know how to pull those levers to drive success and make heroes out of the people that are buying from them.
There's another point that I'd like to build on here that from Merom's discussion gets back to what we keep saying. There's a thread through here about building a culture to launch or a culture to drive adoption. And it's a fundamental question that entrepreneurs need to answer. If they're really just about launching, that's their goal, they're going to need less capital up front and their metrics going to be easier to achieve. But along with that, smart investors know your success will be lower. And if you expect to deliver an exit, your competitive value to the acquirer will be lower. On the other hand, if you're building an adoption culture, your competitive value to an acquirer is going to be higher. But to get there, you need a much more sophisticated, multidimensional go-to-market team. You're going to need people with commercialization experience and background. Going to need product managers who can look at the system of care you've built as part of the product, like Apple does with its Apple Care, its Genius bars, not as an add-on that you would cut if you're short on funding, but as fundamental to your service offering. And that's often something that we see entrepreneurs lacking. They're brilliant, but they've got a blind spot for people who don't have that same degree of knowledge or experience. And what's the customer experience going to be like? What are the glitches that are going to happen, or the training up curve? That you need to be there. If you want your product to be successful, you have to consider that just as seriously.
Yoki, and what you just said, I mean, that's why we talk about courage as a core competence that leaders need to not just have, but they need to build in teams around them. You attract a diverse team with multi-dimensional understanding. You're going to want them to be not just agreeing with one another and compromising to go, oh, isn't this a nice, cushy place to work? You're going to want them sharpening and challenging and debating and arguing and disagreeing and having a creative process that comes out of that. Well, you've got to have some thick skin. You've got to have some courage to kind of jump in and be part of that. And as a leader, you can't be afraid when you see a couple of people kind of argue and go at it with one another. You got to get a smile on your face and go, wow, this is really cool. Let's see what they come up with. And so the whole thing is about, how do you as a leader generate that kind of courage to make that happen? And the same thing is true with a customer collaboration. If a customer gets uncomfortable, if they feel challenged, if you disagree with them, how does that become a trusted advisor dialogue that people hang in with you and welcome it and come out on the other side of that with something better? Well, as an account executive, you better be able to make courage contagious and build a level of courage for that kind of dialogue, or people aren't going to go the distance on that with you.
Well, we had Kwame Anku, talk about the emphasis of making courage contagious in leadership. How do investors and mentors effectively nurture high potential leaders, especially those from disadvantaged backgrounds? What's your take on that?
So I'd like to kick that one off, because I really think first we have to do a reframing on what is disadvantaged. If you're saying, well, this person didn't go to the best schools and they didn't this and they didn't that, if you're looking at the didn'ts, at the nots, you're going to look at them in a one down. But on the other hand, if you look at where they've come from, what they've been able to achieve, what they're striving to achieve, what they've had to do to overcome adversity, you're going to see a lot of guts and resilience and just a way of challenging the world, challenging the status quo. They built skills and strengths that actually people who've come from more privileged backgrounds haven't really had to need to develop. That's something I actually look for when I'm working with companies, because if somebody comes to me with that and I think, oh, good, they're not going to get scared the first time there's a challenge thrown at them. They're going to be like, okay, yep, great. What do we have to do? Let's dig in. And they're going to do what we call arouse. They're actually going to lift people's energy and to tackle this, to come forward with something even better. Merom, do you want to build on that?
You're absolutely right that term disadvantaged, I think that was his comment, was we need to shift the vocabulary and kind of reframe. And if we change our thinking, then we change the world. And you think about, what does triumph mean? What does adversity mean? What does resilience mean?
What does success mean?
Yeah. And people who've been tested come to their entrepreneurial ventures with some one-up skills that it's not about charity for disadvantaged. It's about tapping into some superpowers that can really take you further faster than where you might go.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is a perfect point to talk about Startup Nation, a book that came out a few years ago about Israeli entrepreneurs. And kind of the secret sauce is going through the army. that time that they spend from 18 to 21, they get incredible training, great skills development, great leadership development. We had a friend's son sit there and tell us, where else in the world can a 20-year-old guy be in charge of a platoon of 40 men and be responsible? And I would just also like to say he's a really incredible entrepreneur now in his mid-30s. And it's the problem solving is encouraged, ingenuity is encouraged, strict no excuses accountability. These are the core skills that they come away with. Now, when the book was published, it actually developed a really interesting core following, and that was military families in the U.S., people that were moving on from a military career. And it really emboldened them. Because what can happen here when someone's not familiar with the military CV and resume and experience, they look at it and kind of go, well, you haven't had a real job, have you? But instead, in Israel, when a smart HR manager there takes a look at a CV, she can tell immediately, like, but were you in a tank unit? Were you in an elite cybersecurity unit? Were you in a submarine unit in the Navy? Because all of these have really great skill sets and they're very different. So you can look at that and go, yes, this person will bring a lot to our company and really succeed well in here. Because I know by what experiences that they had.
The one other thing that I would add to that is one of the things that's really different between the Israeli military and the American military. There are a ton of junior officers in the Israeli military. There are very, 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 very few senior officers. And so even in the deployment that's going on now, you have a lot of junior officers that are in key decision-making roles. In the American Army, they would radio to headquarters and go, hey, what are we supposed to do here? Here's what's happening. Tell us what we should do. In the Israeli Army, there's no one to radio to. You make a decision, and then on the news as well as on the field, you're accountable for what happens. And so that is the shaping experience. And again, I think that the perspective that Kwame brought is he said, we have tons of really talented people who've been thrown into adverse conditions through no fault of their own. Mm-hmm. And they've had to wing it. They've had to problem solve. They've had to be ingenious. They've had to figure out on a multi-dimensional level of thinking morally and ethically and financially and practically, what do I need to do? And then take the feedback and learn from that. And oh my Lord, does that make people talented?
No, that's a great description there, comparing the Israeli army to the U.S. Army and the different structures and how they make you a better person for sure. I also noticed that Howard Lubert and Brianna McDonald were there from Keiretsu, and they highlighted the value of the K4's global network and ecosystem. How can entrepreneurs maximize the benefits of a network beyond just attending events and presentations? What's your take there, Louise?
So it starts the 5 courage activators, the 5 dimensions that we talk about. We take a look at first, does the person have a transactional mentality or a partnership mentality when they're moving forward, when they're seeking investment? Because again, it gets back to, are they approaching an angel network like Keiretsu with the idea of, I'm going to work with this angel community, I'm going to take mentoring, I'm going to partner with them, really see what I can get. We see those folks be very successful in getting the funding and getting to the next stages. If the mindset is more transactional and you're treating the angel network as an ATM, that it's like, well, when I need capital, I'll go back to you, but I don't really need your advice or your mentorship. I know what I'm doing out here. They'll actually find that it's harder and harder to raise capital because thoughtful, intelligent angel networks really want to help. That's what they're there for. And they really want to see somebody become successful. And what's important is Is this person coachable? Are they willing to listen? How clear are they in their aim of the company? One of the first dimensions we look at. Are they able to build alignment? How are they doing at adhere? Do they have the right processes, plans, procedures, regulatory, all those things in place to measure what they're doing and when to help bring it forward? Arouse, are they good at keeping their own energy up? Because there are always setbacks. And no mistake that we put ask in the middle of that, because the ask is about your curiosity, your ability to give feedback in a way that can be heard, but also as a leader, take feedback on board because you don't know everything. And that loops back into, are you willing to listen to the angel network? Because if you look around a Karetsa meeting and you look at the level of experience at any one of those meetings, there's so much there that entrepreneurs can tap into.
Hall, can I add a plug for you and for 10 Capital?
Sure, go ahead.
I mean, because one of the things that I've noticed about the way you work with companies is you ask for a 3 or 4 month commitment to a process. And that's really key to, to getting people out of that transactional mindset and having them think about the relationships that they're building, what they're putting into place, the fact that the folks that they're pitching to are going to need to get comfortable with them and have confidence in them. And you can't do that in like 2 or 3 weeks, quick meeting, now make a decision, here are the financial terms. And so you're mentoring companies through that and you having the rigor with that to say, hey guys, this is going to take some time and we're going to need to work with you for a period of several months to do that. It's really important. And I applaud you for being disciplined enough that if somebody is so transactional that they won't make that commitment, that they're probably not a company that you're going to be very successful in getting them funded. So I think that when I heard Brianna talk and I heard Howard talk about the value of the network, I think the message for entrepreneurs is, think about this as a group that you're connecting yourself to and getting yourself embedded with, and be willing to make that commitment to build the relationships and make that work for you.
And that's what I always found about angel investing that most founders, first-time founders, don't often get, is that you have to build a little bit of a relationship with the investor before you're going to raise money. And to your point, transaction is not going to work. It has to be much more longer-term strategic before that happens. So I thought that was a great point you guys made. But considering the feedback from Barry Etra, he was talking about improvements for the future conferences to make this a better experience for the attendees and more engagement. What were your thoughts there, Merom?
Well, I would build on that same thing. I mean, one of the things that I've appreciated about ACA is they're really open. They want feedback. They do experiments. Some of them work, some of them don't work. And I would say that if you're a member of ACA or you're leading an angel group, rather than thinking about what can they do for you in making the next conference a success, think about what can you do for them? Where are there places where you could step up and get involved as a volunteer? Where could you make your feedback known? How could you recruit other people to come with you to next year's conference and enrich the experience out of that? Are there thought leaders that you've heard that you go, wow, they really have some wisdom that would be useful for this group of angel network leaders to hear and bring them forward? And so, I mean, I think Barry had some good feedback, but my reply back is, okay, now think about how you're going to use that and how you're going to drive adoption of the ideas that you have that can make the next conference better.
Louise, what were your thoughts there?
So the other part that I would say about this, and it's again a message to entrepreneurs, come prepared to work. And if something didn't work for you there, if you didn't, you wish you'd had more time with this, Or if something worked really well, either way, give feedback. Take the time. Come on, it's just an email. Take the time to write to them and tell them what worked really well, what you'd like to see more of, because they're not going to magically read your mind and they're not going to know planning next year's event what people are thinking unless we all reach out and say, hey, more of this, please. And if something didn't work for you, give constructive feedback, give them some suggestions of what better would look like. To just come in and complain isn't going to change the status quo.
Right. Well, I always found the ACA was open enough that you could always participate. There's always a place for you, a format or forum for you to
Absolutely.
advocate for your view and make changes the way you want. You do have a lot of cast to herd, but still it is an open place for you to be a part of in a meaningful way.
I mean, that's what I've found with them as well. And so I think if you're frustrated with something, and I think this is a basic leadership principle that we teach in our courage coaching and online courage workshops, is if you're frustrated with something, how do you turn that into a glass half full rather than a glass half empty, and create an uplifting and ennobling kind of presence and energy to be making things better rather than sitting with a frustration of what didn't work for you. They're really good people at ACA. They really want to make a difference. They don't bat 1,000 on the experiments that they try, but they really try hard.
Right. Well, there was one presentation where they talked about, there's a perception that angel investors are seen as tourists in the venture capital world. How can angel investors shift that perception, Louise, and demonstrate their commitment to achieving better financial returns?
So I think the nature of this is that angel investors have a double relationship or dual relationship with portfolio companies. First, we're investors who put money in because we expect a return. Two, we're angels because we put money into people and opportunities that are just too risky for VCs or too early and unproven, largely based on our assessment of the talent and whether we have confidence in them to deliver our capital and our advice. We're tourists when we veer too much on the side of being angels and not enough on the side of being investors. And when VCs can see risk that we've been too biased or short-sighted to take seriously, they see us as tourists and don't take our input and perspective seriously.
Merom?
I mean, I think Louise is absolutely right on that. It really is getting out of the way of our biases. I mean, angels invest because we fall in love with something and we want to be angels and take care of the people that we're investing in. And that doesn't necessarily make us objective. So it's the ability to step back and be more detached from that, to be more critical in our thinking, and then to uplift and ennoble, to practice the very things that we would want a really good management team to do with one another in sharpening thinking, is to do that with the company that we're investing in. Something like, hey, I think this clinical trial could get you to FDA approval, but you know what? It's not going to get you the data that you need to drive adoption. And you're going to have to rethink what your clinical trial is, because the FDA approval is simply a step on the way to value creation. It's not the end of the race. In many respects, it's the beginning of the race. And so the ability to be sharp about that and challenge the thinking and risk that they could get offended, and hey, that's okay. You'll bring them back from the brink of being offended and have a smile on your face and come out of the discussion, still being friends, but having learning as a result of that. And that's something that I think the lesson of being investors and not being tourists is we really need to be able to, to have the kinds of hard conversations that VCs would have with companies and sharpen them up, because otherwise we're going to lose our investment along the way.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, I think it's part of the territory that angels live in, that they have to work in very early stage where you're still shaping and forming the team as well as the startup. And there are a lot of things you have to do to make that work with people and with the processes that they have, that it sometimes look like we're not rigorous investors, but we're still shaping the company. So we can apply rigorous investing to it at some point.
Remember when I said what I said about ask earlier, to be able to give feedback and in a way that can be heard? This would be my advice to angel investors. Don't make it feel like a gotcha game when you're in front of investors. Like, oh, you didn't think about that. Gotcha. Instead, that does nothing to raise their courage level, to raise their awareness and their knowledge level. Most of these folks don't know what they don't know. And so we have to come in as angel investors in a way that uplifts them, that educates them, that shows us that we are investing in this partnership. Again, from our side, it's not transactional. I'm investing in you. I want a long-term successful partnership. Yes, I want a return, and this is one of the ways we can drive towards that.
Great.
Hall, if I could challenge one of the things that you just said, you're right. In early stage companies, we don't have as much historical data to go on, but we do have forward-looking logic and forward-looking thinking. And many of us as angel investors have perspective. If we think through the logic of where is this leading? How many more years are you going to need? What's the next 3 milestones going to be beyond the one that you're raising money for now? And you may be asking things that the entrepreneur hasn't yet thought of yet, hasn't yet built their advisory team for yet. But the more we can shape that in a forward-looking way, I think the more we can really take more control of our fate of what's going to happen with our capital.
That's a good point. I think that says it very well. There's, a changing demographic of angel investors, and, the work-life balance of the new generation and the work from home and all the changes that have gone on in the past few years. Where do you think the angel model is going to come up and align with those new models of work-life balance and remote work and so forth? Louise, what's your thought there?
Well, the biggest sign of health that we see, not just in the younger entrepreneurs, but in more mature ones, is understanding that time is your most precious commodity. You can always raise more capital. You can always, find a different angel group or this or that. But your own time every week, you've got to be very intentional. You've got to say, what am I using my time? Am I being strategic enough? Am I delegating these other tasks to someone else so I can focus where I'm most needed? And to your point, Paul, if you're working from home, if you're working, what used to be considered odd hours, which is now just normal everyday life, hopping on your email at all hours of the day and night and everything. Again, be intentional. And if you're feeling completely overrun, overworked, can't think, it's time to really question, where are you spending your time?
Yeah, I'm going to add again a other side of the border perspective to this as well. The CEOs that we're seeing in Israel since October 7th are being stretched in ways that it's almost unthinkable. They're on reserve duty. They're mobilized to be on like town watch patrol in their communities. They're covering for other employees that are out at this point as well. And they've had to be way more intentional about using their time and way better at setting priorities. And yet, as we're looking at it, delivery deadlines are not getting pushed back. Customer deadlines are being met. Delivery schedules are being met. And people understand that it's not just about, I have a job. This is national security, that if my company falters and other companies falter, we don't have a viable economy and a viable country anymore. And so people are coming together with a sense of purpose. It's spectacular to watch. And so the challenge that I would raise, I mean, in this land of comfort and plenty and abundance, is really, how do we as entrepreneurs, how do we as investors and board members create a sense of purpose, a sense of we're all in this together, a sense of, I haven't done this job before, but it's what needs to be done, and I better just strap on my learning suit and figure it out. And, there is that kind of energy that we see from this generation as well, and much less patience with, what my 9 to 5, stay in my lane, don't veer beyond that. And so I think as leaders, as executive coaches, as board members, as investors, we have an ability to tap into some incredible skill sets in this generation of investors and this generation of entrepreneurs that is really a dream.
That's a great point. It's a new generation, but it's a very promising one as well. See a lot of
Yes, it
great
is.
examples coming out of it. And so, in one sense, the future does look bright from the talent we see coming up in that direction. The last point we had today was we had Brianna McDonald talk about the importance of educating entrepreneurs about complexities of raising money. What are the key steps entrepreneurs should take to prepare for successful fundraising? Louise?
So above everything else, you've got to take a long-term perspective and understand how much money you're going to need in the long run. Too often we have entrepreneurs that come in front of us and they say, oh, we just need 250,000. And you go, what's that going to get you? And
How
they're,
far can you deal with that?
Yeah, that'll get me to the next time I have to go out and raise money. Oh, awesome. Let's free things. It's like, no, tell me, let's look ahead
Well,
because
that's an important point. One thing about entrepreneurs is that they're first timers, and so they're usually off by an order of magnitude on most major decisions anyway. How long will it take? How much
right.
should I raise? What should I do with the money? It's just unbelievably how far off they are. But I guess we should expect that at this stage.
Well, that's
But
the thing, Paul. We've got to expect that. And so, again, you can either make that a gotcha moment and put them down, or you can say to them, you know what, let's take an hour, let's talk this through and take them through the phases. Okay, if you're going to go to a launch, you're going to need this amount of money, and the platform along the way is going to look like this. You're going to take it to adoption, you're going to need this amount of money. And here are the steps to get there. You're right. A lot of it is they just don't know. And then, or they have, they've got a small skill set in their company. So the other thing you want to point out to them is, okay, here's how you can tap into regulatory, or here's how you can do this. We could bring people to you that can help with this. And then when they go out and actually get in front of somebody to raise money, now they're much more educated and they're putting forward a plan. It's going to be much more attractive to angel investors because it's going to look thought through. Merom, want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of one extreme case entrepreneur who presented to Corretto, and Yochi asked the question, how long and at what multiple is this investment going to pay back? And the entrepreneur looked her dead in the eye and said,
You all froze.
you mean we have to pay this back? And it's that was an extreme example,
Right.
but we see an awful lot of entrepreneurs that they're not thinking about how long is it going to take and what is the multiple that they're going to need to pay back. And again, it's not just launch, it's adoption. How much adoption are they going to need to drive? Because you could get to a year and a half and 2 years and be ready to launch. It can take you 3 or 4 years beyond that to get to adoption at a
Right.
level that's going to deliver a return back to the investors. And it's really your ability to show that you understand that and map that out. And that was really what Brianna, I think, was talking about as she was talking with entrepreneurs about being more sophisticated about how we need to be looking at things so that we aren't tourists, we are investors that are in this for a return. And the point that Louise just made is how do we then take someone who has potential, who has raw talent, who's been through adversity? Maybe they haven't had an exit before, which can actually make them even hungrier and more humble than somebody who has. And how do we lift their level of thinking and ennoble them to be able to look at things from an eye of what's going to create a win-win-win for us as investors, for them as entrepreneurs. And then the third part of the win is for the customers, patients, and public that's actually going to benefit from what they're bringing to the market.
I want to add to that it's about, so often I'll see, well, okay, how are you going to sell this? Well, someone's going to buy this and then we'll sell to someone else and then we'll sell it. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. So, if you're chasing each one of these one-offs and it's like, here's the package, you paid for it. And now, even if we have good customer support, we're not growing it beyond that. So how, get really clear in your target market. It also just amazes me when some of these folks will come in, they'll say, well, there's a $2 billion market for this. And I'm like, yeah, and you're 3 people. How are you going to tackle this? Come in and let's hone it down to your target market. How are you going to reach them? How are you going to multiply your value to them so that they're not just a one and done, but you're getting the repeat sales, the repeat business, the growing within that client. So you're offering more options, more service, more things to them. That's all part of it.
One thing I find interesting in looking at most startups' budget is that they always budget for sales, they always budget for marketing, and they always budget for product development, but they almost never budget for the fundraise as far as time and dollars go. They just, for some reason, assume that everything's going to be free and they're going to have infinite time to do this. And of course, those are both very limited resources. You have only so many dollars and only so much time, but you have to raise funding for it. But that's the one thing they never budget for. And I always found that interesting that they kind of assumed, well, it was going to be free. And I think maybe from a family and friends perspective, it was free. You just ask your family and friends, they gave you money. What's not to like about that? Well, as you draw the circle wider, it changes dramatically. And we see that a lot with people coming to us. They just raise family and friends, now they come to our investors, and then suddenly they start getting hard questions like, how are we going to get paid back? How are we going to reach more people? So these are things that come up a lot. What's your take, Merom?
Well, I mean, the other thing that they don't budget money for is their own growth and development and learning. And so how many companies do you see that budget for an executive coach, that budget for recruitment of defining the positions that they're going to need and adding to them, budget for building their team and getting that more cohesive? And again, the assumption is, well, we'll figure it out. We're smart people. We'll make it happen. And then they run up against their own biases and their own thought constraints. And they may have some gifted board members that can mentor them through that, but that's not the same as having a coach. And so we've seen some really sophisticated investors. We're blessed that we're partnered with a number of not only angel groups, but VCs as well that go, wow, we want you in this game. We want you working with this CEO and this executive team. And we know that this is an investment that's going to be worthwhile, that it's going to pay off in what they're able to do and what they're able to achieve down the road. And it's, we've talked with Keiretsu about offering a leadership forum for portfolio companies that Keiretsu has invested in. And they've been very supportive about saying to entrepreneurs, we think that you should invest in that. And you're right, Hall. I mean, it takes an investment to make that happen. It takes an investment to continually upskill yourself and build onto your team. And that's something that really sophisticated entrepreneurs understand that they need to do.
Great. Well, I think we're coming to the end of our time. I want to thank you, Merom and Lise, for sharing your thoughts on the ACA conference. It's been a lot of fun. How best for listeners to get back in touch with you?
Through LinkedIn, where, there are not many Louise Yochi Kleins on LinkedIn. There are not many Merom Kleins on LinkedIn. And so, just put in a search and there we are, we'll pop up, and we'd love to have a dialogue with you.
Well,
Or
great.
we can be reached at Merom@couragegrowthpartners.com or Louise@couragegrowthpartners.com. Thanks so much, Hall, for this opportunity to be with you today.
Well, thank you, guys. We'll include your contact details in the show notes, and looking forward to catching up with you again in future conferences and other activities. But thanks so much for taking time today, and we wish you success.
Sounds
Thank
good,
you.
man. Thanks.
Thanks. Investor Connect helps investors interested in startup funding. In this podcast series, experienced investors share their experience and advice. You can learn more at investorconnect.org. Paul T. Martin is the director of Investor Connect, which is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the education of investors for early stage funding. All opinions expressed by Hall and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of Investor Connect. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.